All right, yeah. Do you want to introduce yourselves and then the topics and everything so we know what's going on?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, my name is Paul DuPont. I'm one of the co-hosts of Hard Lens Media. We're a YouTube channel where we talk about progressive news and politics, both nationally and locally. We're here in Chicago. And I wanted to talk with you. I caught a video that you did recently where you were talking about the Iowa caucus and some of the conspiracies that have propped up around, particularly Pete Buttigieg and his involvement with the app, and conspiracies about the veracity of the vote totals themselves. But I also wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about the candidates that we support, and curious about your opinions, and wanted to share ours as well.
Okay, yeah, sure. And then should I introduce myself for your audience? Or?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, so I'm Stephen Bunnell. I stream on Twitch. People know me there as Destiny. I'm also Destiny on YouTube. I started off doing video games, and then now I do a fair bit of like philosophy and political commentary as well. And then obviously in the recent season, I've been doing a lot of political commentary during the primaries and everything. Yeah.
Right. Awesome. Great. So Iowa, I wanted to let me just open with this. I think it is a mistake to chastise people for thinking conspiratorially with regard to the outcome in Iowa, not because it can be proven, but because the onus really isn't on the individual citizen or voter. The onus here is on the Iowa Democratic Party and the Democratic Party in general, and their failure for allowing people to be confident in the results and the vote totals. I think it's a shifting of blame to say that people who entertain conspiratorial ideas about why this was such a debacle and why we're looking at situations where now the delegate vote totals are essentially tied while officially Bernie Sanders is still ahead by 2,500 votes. That's certainly, it speaks to people's distaste of the Democratic Party and their anti-democratic practices.
Sure. So I think there are a couple of important distinctions to be made here. When we talk about whether or not it's responsible to dabble in conspiracy theory, I think we have to make, one, a distinction between public figure and private citizen. And then two, a distinction of which platforms you're making these types of accusations or these types of speculations on. So if you're like an individual and you want to consider, like, oh, was it a conspiracy theory? Is it not a conspiracy theory? That's fine, sure. And maybe even public figures to some extent as well can think about that. But when you're going onto public platforms and you're literally telling people, I don't trust the results of this caucus, I don't trust any of this, and then you start spreading misinformation relating to it, that to me comes off as incredibly harmful. To undermine a democratic process makes it seem as though you are unwilling to accept the outcome of said democratic process unless it turns out in your favor, which is what the Iowa caucus really seems to be about for a lot of different types of people.
Well, so this is not a new thing that's happened, and certainly we have expressed skepticism in the results of previous elections and previous primaries before, and are put in a position of being forced to accept those results. So it's not really, I don't think it's really fair to say, oh, well, then you're not going to accept the results. Ultimately, the trustworthiness of the vote, again, the onus of making the process transparent and understandable and allowing people to have confidence in the veracity of those results does not lie with the voters, and it does not lie with the citizens who say, this does not appear to be on the up and up. There is a lot of room for malfeasance here. While none of it's provable, the vast amount of space that there is for nefarious activity to go on has led to a lack of confidence in the results themselves.
Yeah, and I just don't really agree with that. I don't think there is much room for malfeasance here. Like everything, more data than ever before is being reported publicly. The first alignment, the final alignment, the popular vote, like all of this information is being reported publicly. A lot of these districts, like I think 40% plus of these districts all had multiple people from different campaigns that were there monitoring the alignments, the first, second alignments. That's why Bernie's camp, tried to say they did well. That's why Pete's camp tried to say that they did well, because everybody had their own staffers at these different events watching them. There's so many moving pieces involved in a caucus that it seems pretty hard to believe that any one party could be in charge of trying to rig the results, or trying to selectively report the results, or trying to selectively favor some candidate over another without any other campaign picking up on that immediately, for one. And then for two, this is just how caucuses go. And it's a little suspect to me that it seemed like Bernie supporters were pretty excited for the caucus deal coming in, because they had expected him to do well in a caucus. And then now that we've seen, that it didn't necessarily turn out that way, now we're pointing to all of these issues with caucuses that we've always known these have existed. In 2012, the Republicans had a huge issue with caucuses. I think it took them like 3 weeks to get the results from that. And, we've seen the coin flips and all the dumb memes and the craziness. And it just seems weird that now we're pointing all of this out because we're not happy with the results when we knew all of this going into it. Those would be my 2 big points for that.
Okay, so let me take on both of those 2 big points. First, more data does not mean more reliable. It just doesn't, right? It is, you've got first rounds of voting and second rounds of voting, popular vote totals, state delegate equivalents, actual delegates that would go to the primary, re-canvases of things, extra data. That is, in my opinion, that's obfuscation by means of overcomplication. Right? It's designed to give almost every candidate some kind of little win. Oh, this candidate did well in this first round here, or this candidate did well in this state delegate equivalent here, or this. It gives the media cycle a time to let every candidate kind of have a little media moment, which is sort of a ridiculous thing that we do with Iowa and is in and of itself anti-democratic by making it so that we're not actually just tallying up what people's preferences are and letting that be the process that works. And I'm sorry, what was your second point again?
My first point had to do with the idea that there
is more data and therefore it should be reliable. And I don't think that's true, right?
Yeah.
Transparency is the thing that makes things more trustworthy.
Sure.
Right.
And sorry, I started writing down your first point, so I don't remember the second thing I said.
I'm sorry. Yeah, but this is a good place to go from because it's like that's where I'm stuck. Is more data does not make it more trustworthy. And you were saying that there have been issues with Iowa in the past. That was your second point.
There have been issues.
Right, and that's the response there is the same. Right, Iowa is always a circus, and that is not a good thing. Like the fact that this has happened before and it is done in this way does not mean that it is good.
Sure, I agree, but I think we should just get rid of caucuses completely. I think caucuses are ridiculous. But it just seems weird that everybody was excited for the caucus until the results panned out in a way that they didn't like. That's one of the things that makes me a little suspect about people's motivations for why they're upset with the caucus now. In terms of like more data being more reliable, obviously more data isn't more reliable, but more publicly viewable data means more transparency, which means a lot of people can catch.
No, it doesn't.
Well, if it's publicly viewable, it does, right?
How they got to the results is how it becomes transparent. Releasing more results is not increased transparency.
Well, so in the past, we didn't know the first and second alignment. I don't even think we knew the popular vote in the past. I think Bernie's campaign sued for that information in 2016. Now we have the first and second alignment. Now we're pointing out more errors before that we never could have in the past because we didn't actually have the data to do it. So in this case, I would argue that more data has resulted in more transparency, necessarily.
And yet those numbers have changed, right? Those numbers continue to change. So what is the process by which those are that is the part that is frustrating to me is, okay, Bernie Sanders has put forward a set of numbers that he believes is true in Iowa. And I'm not claiming that should be accepted as the official vote total.
Okay.
For obvious conflict of interest reasons. But that is a defense mechanism that his campaign did, right?
Sure.
We feel that there's going to be something like we're going to have to combat the narrative that gets put forward about what is going on here. And so we are going to be transparent about our methodology. We're going to be thorough. We're going to show our work, and we're going to come to Iowa after the fact. And when we say we don't agree with what you've done, and we're going to demand a recount, which is what they're doing.
Well, how is Bernie's process any more transparent than the Iowa Democratic Party's process?
He's released he's released a lot more data about how his information was collected. He's released more data about the actual result totals on the night of, and those totals haven't changed, right? The fact that vote totals are changing and we don't exactly know why is, to me, suspect.
I'm not aware of that. I didn't know that Bernie had released any more information than what the IDP had already. I don't even know what more information can be released besides first alignment, second alignment, or first alignment, final alignment, and popular vote. I don't know what more.
You're aware that his campaign did they're looking at first alignment, second alignments, and reporting from the day of, and that their numbers did not match what the reported totals were from the Iowa Democratic Party initially. Of course, we only had 62%, and we got up to near 100%, and then it got flipped over, and now the DNC is doing it. Now that it's just like
sure. It's a lot of it has been like a cluster.
I mean, at the very least, he's been consistent about this is how we collected it, and this is what we found, and that's it.
Sure,
right?
And that's good, I guess, if I mean, for them to release that. But I mean, like, my understanding was that a recanvass was done of all the votes, and that after everything was said and done, I think Pete came out with like 0.5 SDEs more than Bernie or whatever. What is the suggestion at this point? Should they do like another?
So you mean at the current total that the Democratic Party is reporting?
Yeah, that's my understanding.
Pete has 0.08.
0.08 more SDs. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so less than 0.1% of more state delegate equivalents.
Sure.
And while also having 2,500 less votes, even by their own tabulation, which to me is the kind of a key problem. I mean, if you talk to experts that design various type of election tabulation systems, one of the high watermarks, in fact, one of the requirements is that the candidate who receives the most votes is the one that wins. Right.
That depends on the type of system that you have set up, right? My understanding. I mean,
I'm talking about academics who talk about election systems tend to advocate for that. That is that is sort of a high watermark for what they would say is a good election system.
Yeah,
I would say that it is a demonstrable statement to say that it is not a good election system that it allows the person that had less votes to win.
Well, that really depends on a lot of stuff. I mean, it depends on what the goal is of any particular election system. My understanding is that a caucus, the goal for a caucus is to make it so that you have to appeal to a broader part of the state than just the large cities. So that somebody who might take time to go out and canvass in more rural areas that don't have as many people could still have a shot at winning an election or have a shot at having a good showing versus somebody that just canvasses in a few large cities. So the point of a caucus isn't just to say popular vote equals winner, but that they have it weighted a little bit based on the populations in a lot of the different areas.
Well, then why is it a good thing to say that this smaller population deserves to effectively have more weight to their vote than someone from a larger population center?
Well, I never said it was a good thing. I don't like caucuses. I think caucuses are bullshit. But all the Bernie fans seem to love caucuses until Bernie didn't perform as well in love. Now, I don't like caucuses, but if I were to argue in favor of a caucus, because I do support things like, say, the existence of the Senate, and even to some extent the existence of the Electoral College, which is a whole separate argument, but the idea would be that it's good to force you to appeal to a wider part of the state than to spend all of your time campaigning in large cities if the popular vote in those cities is so overwhelming that there's no point in appealing to the rest of the region. That would be the argument. Now, whether we think that's good or bad is one thing, but I mean, we knew this going in. Like, everybody knew this. None of this was private information. All of this is publicly available. Everybody knows how caucuses went in the past. It seems weird to have so much issue with it after the fact.
This is the kind of thing that people have issue with even before the fact. And I'm not the biggest fan of caucuses either, which our Bernie supporting audience, a lot of them will chastise me for saying that. But I agree on those points that the caucus system itself
is garbage.
Yeah, it has major problems with it. And I'm not advocating that we switch to caucuses. The reason Bernie fans tend to like caucuses is because Bernie tends to perform well in them.
Yeah.
But that's a little bit beside the point of should we trust the results here. So one of the major points that you had made was that citing the fact that Pete Buttigieg had purchased services from Shadow Incorporated to the tune of $42,500. You very much hand wave away that point.
Yeah, of course.
Why?
Because I don't think that just because somebody's purchased services from a company that is software is evident that that company would somehow be able to, or would even be incentivized to manipulate the outcome of a caucus. So it doesn't make sense from a capitalist point of view. It doesn't make sense from a conspiracy point of view. Like there aren't any worldviews where that makes sense, I don't think.
If an election is worth rigging, or if an election is worth stealing, someone will try to steal it.
If an election was worth stealing, it's not going to be stolen for $42,500.
That's an interesting statement to make. I don't know what the going rate is for a state election.
If I could afford to steal it, it would be more than that. The price of 2 cars is not the going rate for an American election. I promise. But here's the thing
that it doesn't pass it's not above board, right? Why is it cool for Pete Buttigieg to have services that we don't even really know what these services are. What is it that he got from the company that made this app? You know, in I don't know how, like, we don't even know when they began development on it. There's, speculation. We could see some initial payments and initial organization, but at some point within the last 4 to 6 months, at the longest, right?
Well,
so that app,
I thought we did know what they bought. I thought they bought like text messaging services.
That was Joe Biden.
Yeah, Biden and Gabbard, I think.
No, I think the only candidates that I believe.
Oh no, Gillibrand, I think it was. It was
that's true. Yeah.
Gillibrand, Biden, and then Pete. And I think what they typically sell is it's like text messaging services or something. Is whatever Pete bought from the company should be publicly available. That should be like in an FEC filing somewhere.
Yeah, I think we need to do a little more digging on that, because to my recollection, I can look this up, but it's been rather vague as to what exactly he purchased, and the fact that this company is also responsible for the app. That it's not above board to me, and I don't think it's worth hand waving away.
Well, the problem is that here I'll return this simulator. So the problem is that when it comes to election related stuff, there's going to be a ton of interplay between a lot of organizations that are going to work here. People that get into the business of designing, say, applications for people to canvass data or whatever are probably going to work with other candidates as well. I don't know if it's reasonable that we would expect one company to pop up, only work with one campaign, and then go away, rather than companies that are in the business of making stuff related to this are going to work with a lot of different campaigns. I think that's pretty natural to expect, no?
Maybe that's fair to expect that there would be overlap there, but there's other overlap that is even more nefarious. So look at its parent company and some of the individuals involved with it, and Packard, which is sort of tied with it as well. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of individuals that have overlap with a company that was formerly called New Knowledge.
Wait, so to be clear, when we talk about this overlap, Pete Buttigieg's...
Same individuals working for both companies.
Well, so Pete Buttigieg's... I think campaign manager's wife is the CEO, I think, of Acronym, that was one of the investors in the company Shadow that made the app. Mm-hmm.
It's the key investor, right?
Sure.
That's another thing. They also claimed to be completely hands off and have no knowledge of it, and it seems like no, there's the same people that are working in both places.
Well,
incredibly intertwined organizations.
So I don't know how intertwined the parent company is with the subsidiary or whatever, but again, in the world of politics, there's going to be a lot of crossplay between different people. I don't know if reaching into your campaign advisor's wife's subsidiary company that designed an app for at this point we can start to draw these connections across everybody. I feel like we're reaching levels of conspiracy or conspiratorial thinking that we just don't have any evidence of any of this happening. To go back, for instance, for the statement, should we trust the results? I think that this is a really good question to ask, but there's two different ways you can go with it, right? Is there a chance that a lot of these results are flubbed because the caucus process is, just very bizarre, and I could see a lot of mistakes happening across a lot of different people? Yeah, sure, but that's not the claim being made. The claim being made is that due to all of these connections and all of these shadowy under companies and all the interplay between the people, that somehow these results are being driven by one particular party. I don't think there's any evidence where that's been demonstrated whatsoever, and I don't think a few connections between people in your campaign to a company that owns a company that made the app is the best way to go about doing that.
Well, so here's a distinction that can be made. There may not be direct evidence, but there's circumstantial evidence, and that's what I'm trying to get at, is that the individuals who are involved with Acronym and with Shadow are the same individuals who were involved with this company, New Knowledge, that has rebranded itself as Yonder, which got in trouble. Basically, there's this cottage industry now of tech firms who are we're going to protect people from Russian cyber attacks and bots and things. And New Knowledge basically got in trouble for trying to influence, was it the Roy Moore election? By creating a bunch of bot accounts and pretending that they were Russians, and then claiming that he had Russian bot support. Now, when the founders of that company are claiming to be social media experts and are banned on social media for this type of activity, and are also tangentially involved with this cottage industry of we're going to protect from the Russian threat while apparently acting in nefarious ways online doesn't instill confidence in anything.
So there's three things going on here. So one, this doesn't even rise to the level of circumstantial evidence, right? Circumstantial evidence is like you see something that is a clear sign of misdoing or whatever, but it's not like a 100% linked thing or whatever, right? So for instance, showing up at the scene of the crime and finding DNA evidence, that's circumstantial evidence. DNA evidence is circumstantial evidence at a scene of a crime. This saying that like somebody worked for somebody that did something bad in the past, that's not circumstantial evidence of any crime being committed. We don't even have evidence of a crime or conspiracy being committed at this point. That's one thing to think of. Number two, I don't know any of the other connections that you're talking about for the Russia stuff. I just don't know about it. But like when you think about how these connections are made, right? Like if you're going to ask a company to do something, you're probably going to trust the people around you. You're probably going to ask people around you, and like a lot of these people are just going to be shared amongst each other. Like that's just how these things work, in like in literally every single industry, even outside of electioneering. And then number three, we have to be very clear about what this app was supposed to do. The only thing this app was supposed to do was transmit results. It wasn't supposed to change any results. It wasn't supposed to like misreport anything. To my knowledge, none of that has been shown or demonstrated. That like the app was like transmitting selectively that certain candidates were winning when that wasn't true. Like the app wasn't like, like changing vote totals or anything. It just messed up and they weren't able to report any of the results.
It introduced chaos into the system, right? And when chaos is introduced into the system, established power wins out.
I don't know if that's necessarily true. It really depends on the time. I mean, like when I would say it's more accurate to say that when chaos is introduced into a system, an organized power can win out. One of the narratives that a lot of the mainstream media is talking about as of recently is actually that Bernie Sanders is one of the people that's capitalizing on all of the chaos going on between the other candidates because Bernie's campaign is very well funded. They run independently of everybody else, and they have a really good way of just building their campaign and moving forward while everybody else is kind of bickering and fighting amongst themselves. I don't think it's only the establishment that benefits in any chaotic environment. And again, to return to the central point, there's been zero evidence of wrongdoing or misdoing from any party involved here. And a caucus has so many moving pieces and so many people involved in it from so many different campaigns. It's hard to believe that it's like snuck by all of them.
I think well, okay, so I don't know where I can find for you evidence that will meet your standard for evidence of wrongdoing.
Well, so like my standard is pretty easy. Like, is there any evidence whatsoever, circumstantial or not, of wrongdoing having occurred? Like, we have an app that malfunctioned. It didn't report vote totals correctly. We have like a lot of stuff that was like that just was reported and changed a lot, which sucks. But I mean, like, this is the first time we've ever actually seen into a caucus before. This could have been happening the whole time and we never knew it. Like, these are the only.
We've had more than a little bit of, we maybe haven't had as verbose of data, but we've had more insight. Like, you mentioned coin flipping and things like that before. Mm-hmm. Parts of it we've had knowledge of before.
Do you remember what was the SDE count before the recanvass?
I can pull it up.
Or maybe somebody in my community would know. Was Pete winning by like 1 and now he's winning by like 0.08 or something? I don't remember what it was before.
I don't off the top of my head.
Okay. My understanding was that prior to the recanvass, Pete was winning by, it was a very, very small number. I don't remember what it was, but I think it was a very, very small number. And
well, it still is a very, very small number.
Yeah, and it is a very small number still. So even despite all of the tomfoolery and all of the weird stuff going on, it doesn't seem like it changed much. Like, it seems like for the most part, it was about correct.
Right, but it's not changing much doesn't tell you anything about whether it was above board in the first place.
So do we think that even after the recanvass that there's... So I'm curious, what is the implication here? Do we think that there is a single party behind the scenes that's trying to make one party come out on top?
I think that the incentives for the political established class, right, both candidates and those working within the Democratic Party, is clearly to stop the person who is promising things like Medicare for all and the living wage and things like that. It's clearly a stop Bernie tactic, which is apparently the current strategy is, let's try to force a contested convention. That's
so
apparently what's going on.
Sure. So let's say that that's the case. If that was the case, then why would Tom Perez, the head of the DNC, call for a recanvass on an election that they're trying to rig against Bernie when the recanvass ends up having a result that favors Bernie?
It doesn't favor Bernie.
Well, it did, though. He caught up a little bit in SDEs. Like, I know that Pete had a slightly larger lead before.
He's trying to instill that confidence that I'm saying is sorely lacking. He's trying to placate. That's my interpretation.
Okay,
right?
So...
By not fundamentally changing the results, but being like, yeah, but your guy actually did a little bit better.
Okay.
That's not doing anything.
So, and all the people involved in this, there's some top level reporting or something that's just flubbing the vote tallies, even though all of this information is public, all of the first and last alignments.
I don't know, but there's room for doubt, and that's a problem.
Okay, so if we take a step back here and we look like on a larger scope, I remember that I had a big issue with this type of thinking when Trump claimed that 3 million illegal immigrants were the only reason why Hillary won the popular vote. And I was kind of wondering after the election, is Trump, if Trump loses, is Trump going to come out and say, well, the vote was rigged? Doing something to undermine our democratic institutions to make it seem like people shouldn't have faith in our democratic process seemed to me to be like a very scary thing. Do you see that as being somewhat similar at all here, where the idea that like we can't trust a caucus, which is literally one of the most open ways possible of doing votes, that if
no, it's very brilliant actually. So yeah, that was the predominant narrative after 2016 was, oh, the Trump supporters and Trump himself are not gonna respect the vote total. They're gonna say that it was wrong. And then when Trump won and Hillary lost, it was the Hillary camp that said it was not on the up and up. It was Russia.
Wait, no. The Hillary camp never claimed that Russia changed any of the vote totals. That's never been a claim. That's never been a center of any investigation. And
no, not that they changed the vote totals, but that Russian influenced the election. It was never directly like, oh, they got into.
Wait, what does that have to do with undermining our democratic institutions, though? Because my original question was about changing vote totals.
Well, our democratic institutions involve more than voting, don't they?
Well, but voting is one of the most, if not the most important part of it. The idea that you feel like when you vote and put that in the ballot box,
claiming that there's malfeasance and that affected the election and therefore the election results should not be trusted is the same basic argument that you would make that if you're saying that, well, the vote totals themselves were tampered with. The conclusion is the same. We shouldn't trust the results of this election.
No one said that the vote shouldn't be trusted. No, Hillary's camp never said that.
That's what I'm saying. They don't have to say the votes shouldn't be trusted. All they have to say is that the election result shouldn't be trusted, that there was malfeasance
Nobody
elsewhere.
said the results shouldn't be trusted. They just said that Russia engaged in a campaign of disinformation in order to influence the election in a certain way. Nobody said that the votes shouldn't be trusted or imply that Russia changed the vote totals. But even so, like, this is still like a far different claim than what we're claiming now, which is more severe, that in Iowa, for instance, we shouldn't trust the outcome of the election.
I'm saying there is room for conspiratorial thinking, and it is wrong to attempt to chastise people for engaging in that, given the situation that we're in.
Yeah, I guess, but the problem is, like, if you're going to be conspiratorial over the results of a caucus when you have literally not even circumstantial evidence to show wrongdoing, like, you set yourself up to be conspiratorial about literally any possible thing that happens that doesn't go your way, right? Like, literally anything, because everybody is connected in every possible way in the political world. Bernie's head campaign advisor used to be a campaign manager for, like, John Kerry. Like, literally, even Bernie's camp has people that have worked with other campaigns in the staff in the past. Like, you've seen Bernie people attack, who was the one volunteer in Nevada, I think, that like worked on a Hillary Clinton campaign before, that where they attacked her and I think harassed her off of Twitter. And I don't even know if she's going to be volunteering for the event anymore. Like you set yourself up, right? I feel like you can set yourself up in a world where every possible thing can be a conspiracy if you don't win. I don't know, like that's scary to me, and I don't think it bodes well for having people having faith in these democratic processes. It seems weird that the same party to me, or it seems weird that the same party that was constantly decrying things like voter ID as being means to prevent black people from voting or poor people from voting because the electoral process is fine, we don't need voter ID, are now all of a sudden saying a caucus can be rigged, which is one of the hardest to rig processes probably in the history of all of mankind because of how many different people and moving parts are involved.
My point is, and I'll reiterate, shaming people for engaging in conspiratorial thinking doesn't solve that problem, because even if you're entirely successful in that endeavor and everyone is like, you know what, we can't question it. Now you've even opened the door further for potential malfeasance, right? Because if power is unchecked, power is unwatched, and power is unquestioned, then corruption will take place. That's where it will thrive. The answer to this solution, the way to get people to not think conspiratorially is to inspire confidence in the election process and in the election systems.
Which we did with a recanvass. We recounted most of the votes. Like a lot of
It is an attempt to. I'll give it that.
Well, what else can they do?
They're doing the recount, and that is about as good as we can do right now. But I'm saying we didn't really know about that until the last couple of days. So even as this argument stood 3 days ago, that I think I'm still accurate. I think it's still correct that the way to, if your end goal is to quell conspiratorial thinking, then it doesn't come from chastising those that engage in it. It comes from inspiring confidence in the actual election itself.
Okay. I mean, it also hurts when a lot of people on Bernie's side seem to be very upset that the recanvass started to happen when Bernie's lead was predicted to actually appear and grow when the satellite.
Oh, I'm sorry, I confused the recanvass with the recount. Bernie is still calling for a recount.
Okay, sure. Because a lot of people in Bernie's camp were upset when the recanvass was called, when 97% of the results were reporting, because they thought, well, now you're only trying to do it because the satellite delegates are going to make it so that Bernie comes out on top. So people were upset at that even when they suggested recanvassing then. I don't know, a lot of this just feels like partisan politics to me. It doesn't feel like people actually care about the integrity of any of these processes. They just really want their guy to win. The way that the timeline plays out on all of it, the way that people are saying, well, now we need a recanvass, now we don't need a recanvass, these should be counted, these shouldn't be counted. If Pete Buttigieg had set up some of these satellite caucuses the way that they were set up for Bernie Sanders, people would 100% be calling for conspiracies here. But nobody does because Bernie Sanders set it up. The way that they had these done in areas that were highly Hispanic with young people, the way they had these set up in different college campuses where young people would vote, some of the widest margins of wins happened at a lot of these satellite caucuses that Bernie's campaign had a large role in deciding where these would be at. Now, I don't think that's conspiratorial, but I mean, if you wanted to draw a conspiracy, you could say, well, Bernie's camp definitely hardcore, gunned for these satellite caucuses, and they set them up in such a way that they benefited massively from them. Now, I mean, I'm not doing the conspiracy thing, but I mean, you could there if you wanted to. I don't know. It all just feels like a lot of partisan politics to me.
Can't you both be an advocate for the candidate that you support and an advocate for a less complicated, more streamlined process that inspires more confidence?
Yeah, of course, which is why I hate caucuses, and I don't think they should ever be done. But I felt that way before and after the caucus.
You and I agree there.
Okay, sure. Okay, that's good. I hope that's true. I don't know your history in particular, but I do know I am personally involved with a lot of other Bernie supporters that were very excited for the caucus system before the actual caucus happened, which is a little upsetting to me.
While I'm not a particularly big fan of caucuses, and this you may find this to be another version of conspiratorial thinking, I think there is a lot of evidence that electronic vote totals can and maybe have been tampered with. And so in
Iowa?
Not in Iowa, no. In primary states, right? So electronic vote tabulation is a method that is very open to malfeasance, right? Election fraud. Right.
Sure. I've never heard evidence of this happening in any of the U.S. states. I mean, Trump even put together a commission to look into this in 2016, and he didn't find anything as much as the Republicans would want to. Or I'm sorry, in 2017.
There's a study from the 2016 primary called Electoral System in Crisis, electoralsystemincrisis.org, I believe. And I know those papers are involved in the Jared Beck DNC fraud lawsuit. That was originally thrown out of a Florida court and has made its way through the appeals process, and it is being considered to be reviewed at the Supreme Court, to be heard at the Supreme Court.
This electoral system in crisis, was this a study that showed that potentially hundreds of thousands or millions of illegals may have voted in the election?
No. This is a mathematical statistical analysis where they took the precincts of every state in the Democratic primary and lined them up in a cumulative graph of the votes from the precincts with the fewest number of citizens voting to the ones with the most. And the law of large numbers essentially states that you will have variance on one side of the graph where you have few people voting, but as the number of people that vote increases, by the time you get to the end, those lines should almost be parallel with what the final results were, right? So if one candidate got 55% and the other candidate got 45%, you should see roughly two parallel lines at the 45 and 55 percentage marks when you line up the votes on a graph in that way. And I may get this number wrong, but it was more than 20. It may have been as many as 25 states. They've identified graphs where those lines are at distinct angles, and many of them where they end up crisscrossing at a point, which is the type of law of large numbers through line that you would see if fractional voting was being employed.
So I wish I knew more. I am aware of one election fraud study that was done in a mathematical manner, and I can explain exactly why that study was done in a poor way that showed an error with the way that they did stats. But For the one that you're talking about in particular, I'm not intimately familiar with it.
Yeah, I mean, very
Yeah.
few people have run into it, and
The thing
I
that
just
I
want
would
to point out that a study that talks about people coming in and voting is not a study on election fraud. That would be a study on voter fraud, and this is
sure.
a different thing that I'm talking about.
The thing that I would be curious about, and I would hope that it would be accounted for, was that as results are reported, results are not uniformly reported across an entire state. That results are oftentimes going to be reported in a non-uniform manner depending on the population in a precinct. So let's say, for instance, I have a state that has 99 counties that are rural and one county that is highly urban. It might be that in the early parts of the reporting of that, whoever candidate or whichever candidate is supported by the rural districts ends up having like a 50-point lead because those counties have very small populations. The vote is reported early, they get it all done, and that's cool. But then as the night goes on and more of the urban vote is reported, that lead slowly shrinks and shrinks and shrinks and maybe even reverses as more of that larger district is counted. Now, I would hope that a study like that would incorporate something like that, but the thing that scares me when people try to use math and only math and not stats when you talk about stuff like this is that you're not like districts aren't uniform in the way that the voters are there, right? Like cross-sectionally, you're going to have a different percentage of supporters across different precincts, and you would hope that that's taken into account with a study like that. I'm not aware of it, but I would hope that that's looked at in a study like that. Yeah.
It is an interesting one. I think we will, if that case ends up being heard at the Supreme Court. I think it's one of the documents. It's certainly not the primary one, I don't think, but I think it's one we will potentially hear more about.
Sure.
It's the one I found the most convincing of the DNC fraud arguments from 2016, the 2016 primary. That said, I think we've more or less exhausted our position here. Bernie Sanders, you don't particularly care for him, I hear.
I mean, I would support him over Trump pretty easily, but yeah, I mean, I'm not in favor of most of his major policy positions at this point, I don't think.
Most of his major policy, is there any of his policy positions that you do like?
I'm sure there must be some, but in terms of like, I don't know how I feel about support for the Green New Deal. I'm not a fan of like nationwide rent control. Medicare for all as a policy, I think would be okay. I don't know if the political capital is there for it over like a public option. The like protectionist policies that we take on trade are not something that I'm a very big fan of. I don't hear him speak much about foreign policy. What he said of foreign policy seems okay. I like his policy on guns. He seems to not be as radical as the other Democrats on guns, which is good. And then I hope he's probably got a good policy on drugs compared to any Republican. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the latter points I more or less agree with. I think that a calculation on Medicare for all, I think by taking it into the realm of is it politically feasible or strategically wise is probably not the way to evaluate a candidate that you support. I think he certainly knows the strategy that he's going for and isn't about to like show his hand by telling everyone what's going on. If you look though at, and I have my suspicions, and so I'm getting into speculative territory about how he would intend to do it if he won. I would say that if you look at when he won his mayoral race in Burlington, he won by one vote, and the plan was essentially from his opponents was like, let's just be obstructionistic and make sure that this guy can't do anything wrong. And he just took to public access television and took to the streets of Burlington and continued to tell his supporters and his constituents what he was planning to do and who was getting in his way. And he won by a landslide the next time around and got a lot of people to replace the people who were obstructing him with candidates that were in line with his policy positions and ideas. And so I think we could see that similar style strategy play out here. I don't particularly expect him to cave repeatedly the way Obama did when he said, oh, we're going to have a universal healthcare system. I mean, public option. I mean, rounding care.
I mean, Obama had to cave because that was the only way he was going to get legislation passed. You can't pass major.
That's the excuse that he made.
What was the alternative?
Well, he had 10 months of supermajority. He could have forced it through. He had majorities in the House and the Senate.
They literally couldn't. I can't remember the specific senator's name, but Obama literally couldn't, even with a supermajority. He literally, he literally wasn't able to. He couldn't get the votes for it done.
Yeah, I think
was it Lieberman?
I'd have to go back and look at
like
that.
They literally couldn't do it. They couldn't force it.
Right. So, I mean, so how did we get so far degraded, right? I mean, people got really mad at AOC for, in some ways, you could say, saying the quiet part out loud. And that is to say, if we want Medicare for all, and that is going to be the negotiating demand we come to the table with, and we're aware that we are going to fight against a lot of opposition, and we may not get everything that we want. We may end up with a public option, and that's it. At the very least, it's a step in the right direction. How come How come Obama started with universal health care and then pre-capitulated to public option before getting to the negotiating table where it became the ACA?
Well, it sucks, but the answer is that not everybody in America wants that. And that's something, unfortunately, you have to deal with as a president. Like, when you're dealing with a House and a Senate, you have to deal with an elected body. Like, Obama, we did not get the single-payer healthcare.
You're never going to get unanimous support from the citizens of the country.
But it's
not
like,
certainly was elected on that platform. But he could absolutely have made the argument that he was elected. The majority of the people that voted for him absolutely knew that that's what he wanted to do.
Single-payer healthcare?
So he was always, if you go back and look at the rhetoric, I assumed at the time, I was much less politically motivated at the time. And I assumed that what he meant by universal health care was some form of single payer. And I think if you go back and look at the campaign rhetoric from 2007 and 2008, you realize how vague he actually was on those topics.
Yeah, because I thought my understanding, and I could be wrong because I was young as well, but my understanding was one of the huge selling points was the war, was getting out of Iraq and closing down Guantanamo Bay.
Yes, that was a big
these
one.
Were like
which
way
totally didn't do.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But like the big thing that stood in the way of Obama in terms of passing like single payer healthcare wasn't Republicans, it was moderate Democrats. The fact is that the Democratic Party is not like 100% aligned on things like a single payer option for healthcare. And as president, you have to be mindful of that. You can't just railroad that type of legislation through and hope to, have those seats held onto and not have that immediately reversed as soon as the next House or Senate election comes around. Like every 2 years, like you're just going to lose like your majorities if people are forced to vote on things that Obama lost it anyway even, so.
But again, if you go with the Bernie strategy that I was pointing out from Burlington, it doesn't matter how obstructionistic they are if your voters actually do want the policy platform that you're proposing, and you point out the obstructionism and you point out that you're still fighting for what the people who voted, like you just look at polling data, Medicare for All polls extremely, you get a majority of even Republicans.
First of all, that's not true. Secondly, Bernie is just in Vermont. That's one voter base. My guess is that the voter base in Vermont is probably a particular way that doesn't match the entire, like Burlington doesn't represent the entirety of the United States of America.
Certainly it doesn't, but the political strategy can translate. I mean, it can translate to a larger scale. I mean,
only if you have the voters.
The current mayor of Burlington is not getting anywhere near the amount of media attention that Bernie Sanders is, right?
Sure.
If he was president, he could command a lot more media attention and thus help shape help shape the opinion around what's going on in Washington.
Yeah, but the only reason why Bernie's able to get that done is because the voters had the desire for it anyway, is what it sounds like. Maybe there's a little bit of lead, a little bit of play into it, a little bit of circular back and forth where,
so you think that the voters do have the desire for Medicare for all, or am I misunderstanding?
No. So Medicare for all polls anywhere from like 25% to 75% based on how you ask the question.
Fair enough.
Yeah, so like whether, would you be in favor of the government providing health insurance to every person? That polls at like 74% or something. Would you be in favor of the government canceling all private insurance to replace with their own? That polls at like 25% or something. And then like if the government were to cancel all private insurance and replace it with a good government option, would you be okay with that? That polls at like 52%, I think. So the how Medicare for all polls depends like hardcore on how you ask the question, firstly. Secondly, we haven't even seen Medicare for all get tested in like a general field. We haven't seen all of the attacks against it. I don't know if you remember when Obama was talking about even the Affordable Care Act, we had so many conversations about death panels and rationing of care, and is a doctor going to murder my grandma to steal her kidney to give to someone else in the communist USSR, and that was just the Affordable Care Act. So we don't know what it's going to look like come general time if we try to run even a moderate universal healthcare, even a moderate like public option plan. That might get clobbered in the general election, come time for the Republican attack ads. We don't know that or not. So I don't know if Bernie has the political will. Maybe in Vermont he does, but across the entire United States, across some of the more red states, when you've got Trump at higher approval ratings than he's ever been, like 90+% in the Republican Party, 49% across the entire United States, when Trump's higher than he's ever been, are we going to be able to use political capital to bully out Republican senators and congressmen? I don't know if that's a possibility. Not on a plan that extreme. That's just my take, though. I could be wrong, but
I don't think it's fair to call the plan extreme when the vast majority of the Western world has that in place already.
No, that's not true. The plan would be more extreme than literally any other healthcare plan across the entire world. I don't think any country has a plan as extreme as what Bernie is suggesting. There's a lot of other countries that have forms of universal healthcare systems, but
When you consider the UK's plan more extreme, it literally is a government healthcare system, right? It is government hospitals.
The
right?
idea that, sure, they have publicly owned hospitals. They have some private owned hospitals as well. But the idea that there are no copays, no deductibles, no cost for insurance, full coverage for dental and vision, and then the outlawing of all supplemental private insurance, no other first world country has that extreme of a plan in place. Like nowhere.
I think it is hyperbolic to describe that as extreme when the UK's copay, I don't know what it is right now. The last time I saw any kind of information on it was maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. It was like, I don't know, what, £10?
Sure, it might be.
How is zero so much more? I mean, I understand that zero is a weird mathematical number, but like it's £10, man.
Yeah, but I mean, you can call it hyperbolic, but it's just factually correct. Like a £10 copay is a lot different than a no pound copay. Like nobody has zero.
But no pounds is not drastically more extreme, right? That's the part I take issue with.
It might be. If you're talking about millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions of prescriptions filled every single month or day or whatever across the United States, the difference between collecting $5 or $10 per prescription versus zero, that adds up. That might be another $1 billion or $2 billion of funding that you have to fight for, in Congress to get your plan passed. Like those little things like copays and deductibles, one, they add up. One, because it makes it so you have to get more funding for your bill, and two, it causes even more consumption of healthcare to happen if there's absolutely no cost associated, at least at the point of service, of getting any type of prescription or medical provided stuff.
So if you and I were in charge of this legislation, my starting point of we should have no copays seems like a good negotiating tactic. If you're going to say, but we need some because blah, 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 I'll be like, well, maybe we can compromise somewhere. Maybe that's an area of compromise. Is that such a bad thing?
I mean, I guess if you walk in expecting to get rid of it immediately, then sure.
No, don't walk in expecting to get rid of it immediately. And don't walk in with the pre-capitulation done. I'm saying ask for what you really want and then let the arguments fly and then let the compromise happen.
Sure. I guess I don't know if things work if there's like a political reality backing up like that, like how I negotiate for a pay raise with my boss, like ask for $40K and settle for $35K. I don't know if the electoral math works out to be the same way. Like if I'm in a district that's like heavily pro-Republican that hates all forms of single payer, I don't know if they're going to feel like me not supporting single payer is a compromise when they never would have gone for it anyway. I don't know. Honestly,
where you live and what your district is irrelevant to the question of when this actually gets to the national level, right? Federal legislature doesn't care what district you're in necessarily.
Oh, federal legislature, that's the only thing that matters, actually. The national stuff, the federal stuff is irrelevant. The only thing that matters is how it breaks down on a district-by-district level. Because at the end of the day, when you're in the House, what's going to matter is when you go around and you whip all those votes for your legislation, the only thing that's going to matter is the district that all of your Congress people are parts of. Because those are the people that are going to have to show up in 2 years to do their next electoral cycle. And those are the people that are going to be at risk if they end up voting pro or con on some particular plan, and their constituents don't like that. Like that's an incredibly important part about getting support for your legislation, I think.
I don't mean electorally. I don't mean getting reelected. I don't mean whipping votes. I mean the context of the decision is not let's get everyone in the federal government together and feel like what the people in one particular county and one particular state want. Well, it is a federal level decision.
Yeah, but when you vote on things, the way that you vote is going to be largely determined by how your people at home think, right? Like, let's say, for instance, that I am
you should be beholden to your constituents, and that's another major platform of Bernie's position is like, hey, let's get money out of politics. I don't take this money from major corporations, because to him that makes those corporate donors that elevates them above the constituents to the legislator.
I'm just saying that, like, if I'm a congressman, let's say that I'm a Democrat and I manage to win a seat in like a swing state somewhere, and I'm narrowly holding on to that seat. Maybe this was a district that Trump heavily won in, right? When we saw the blue wave in 2018, this happened. We won a lot of those districts that went plus 20 for Trump. Well, if you're asking that congressman now to vote on an extreme healthcare plan, when he's looking back at home at his district, like, he's not ready to throw away the next election because you want his vote on some particular healthcare plan, especially if we lose enough seats that now that just gets rolled back the next time the Republicans, take office, which even happened to the Affordable Care Act, which wasn't even that extreme. Even that got rolled back. So,
Well, yeah. So we just have to assume that Republicans will want to roll back anything you do anyway. So if they're going to try to roll back anything you do anyway, why only ask for like one little bit and then let them take it away? Why not ask for what you want and let them take away the little bit and then ask for what you want again?
Well, it seems like the policy is putting the cart in front of the horse. Like, what needs to happen is the American people need to feel a certain way before you try to railroad legislation down their throats in order to get them to change their mind on it, I think.
So this is an older study, but you said before it's not true that the majority of Republicans support Medicare for all. This was from October of 2018 from The Hill, and they found that 52% polled said that they supported Medicare for all. Hey, Helen. Yeah, I would say more than half of Republicans in a new American Barometer poll say they support Medicare for all, also known as single-payer healthcare system.
Yeah, it's possible. I think 52% was, but that doesn't change what I said earlier about how the question is framed.
No, I'm sorry. I just was going back to because I had made that point earlier, and you said that was just demonstrably wrong. I'm just saying there have been polls that show that.
Wait, that what? Oh no, I said it was wrong when you said that Medicare for all polls at 75%. That's just not true. That really depends on how you ask the question. If you're getting it that high,
okay. I'm not quoting any specific numbers. What I'm saying is it is demonstrably a popular program, regardless of what party you're in. I mean, it's certainly less popular among Republicans, but it still enjoys pretty strong support. And the way that it gets talked about at the national level is like nobody wants this because it's somehow communism is too much.
Well, I don't think a lot of people realize what Medicare for all means. I think that's still something I don't think most Americans, I would guess.
I think it was a great branding of, I mean, we've only been talking about this concept in this country for nearly 100 years.
Yeah, but I don't know how many people in America know that Medicare for all means no private insurance, that almost all of it is going to be banned. And that's a huge stickling point for a lot of unions. A lot of them exist just to negotiate things like healthcare. It's a big thing that a lot of people like their healthcare in the United States still somehow. I don't know why, but they do.
Well, we need to strengthen unions so that they can do more than just negotiate healthcare. Because, for example, in the case of the Culinary 226, right, their entire case is sort of weird because part of Bernie's Medicare for all plan basically says, look, you're going to get workers of this union, you're going to get a refund for what you're currently paying for healthcare because you're going to get financial refund and you'll be given healthcare.
Yeah. But you also make one less. Well, you also make one less reason for a union to exist. Then you're taking away a power from the union.
Right. So I would advocate, and I don't know how I'm fairly confident Bernie Sanders would feel similarly, but I can't say for certain. But the repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act. All right, let's give unions real teeth in this country again.
Did Taft-Hartley Act, did that have to do with making it illegal or legal for the way that
it makes it so that unions have to give their employers, I forget what it is, 2 months notice or 3 months notice before going on strike. It makes wildcat strikes illegal. It basically puts all of the negotiating power, basically anything a union could do, they're basically hamstrung and everything favors the employer at that point. So something like negotiating healthcare is one of the few scraps that unions have left. Give them things to do.
Sure. Okay.
All right. We have just the last few minutes before we have to prep for our show, but Destiny, thank you for having me on and let me have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Thanks for chatting with me too. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Peace, guys. I gotta run.
Have a good one, man. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Later.
Okay. I think I did okay, right? D-Live Destiny was not out for this debate. Had Bloomberg on the ropes with these NDAs, and Bloomberg is saying this dumb shit listen, I said some jokes and some women were mad at him. I'm fucking sorry.